Accountability Board meeting for March 25th, 2021. And we're going to go ahead and skip our meeting or approving of the minutes. And are we going to jump right into the budget discussion?
Should we talk a little bit about the what's been going on?
I guess we should have a little bit of a discussion about it.
Sure.
Yeah, we can go ahead and start. Yeah.
Well, so folks, as of yesterday, we are the Police Accountability Board is represented by Shearman and Sterling LLP, a team of fantastic lawyers at an international New York City-based law firm. They are helping us make sure that we get all the information we need from the city when it comes to our pressing investigations. They're helping us write whatever rules, create whatever procedures are necessary to make sure that our work can get done. This is a landmark step. Most civilian review boards can take years to have counsel that represents their interests, and we were able to get it done in a couple of months thanks to a wonderful group of support people out there. Special thanks to the New York Civil Liberties Union for connecting us with some wonderful lawyers. Thank you for everyone in the community who reached out, with recommendations for people who could help out. We got a lot of lawyers interested in helping us, and so just thank you for everyone who offered their services to us. We are confident that with Shearman and Sterling, we're going to be able to do the work. I think it's also worth mentioning this Memorandum of Understanding, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the community about what's going on with this. I'm happy to fill in, Chair Wilson, if you want to also describe what's going on here too. I can take a first crack at it. We've been trying to get information from the city for months about these incidents that have been occurring, whether it's on Harris Street or other places, trying to make sure that we have the documents, basically, who was on the scene, what are the reports, what are the instructors' manuals, policies, procedures. We just need to have everything so that the public can know that whatever it is we come up with, whether it's a proposal, a call for action, it's based on the evidence, it's based on the facts. So we needed to have all the information before we really came to any firm conclusions about those things. And so we've been trying to work with the city for a while to get that information. Now, about a month ago or so, the city just said, we want an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. That's kind of a legalese term for just an agreement, a written agreement between the PAB and the city to determine, how information can be, given from one party to another. Of course, the city charter says that we have to have whatever information we request, but MOUs can sometimes be a way to lay the groundwork for easy access to information. So, City Council's attorney, Linda Kingsley, and Corporation Counsel, Tim Curtin, and other folks in the city's law department negotiated an agreement together. Linda Kingsley asked for some of our input on that process, and we certainly gave her some thoughts. And thanks to Linda Kingsley's hard work, we were able to have a Memorandum of Understanding that we got yesterday, the same day that we were getting our lawyers in place. So it's kind of perfect timing because, again, without City Council's lawyer working hard to get this thing in place, it's not clear that it ever would have happened. And so again, I just on behalf of the board, thank Linda Kingsley for her work on that. We just came out of a meeting with our lawyers, at least I did, with our brand new lawyers where they reviewed that MOU. And I think that we are going to be moving forward, making sure that there is some kind of agreement in place, building on the foundation that's already kind of been negotiated by the city and city council. So we can have an agreement that gets us the information we need as soon as possible, and all information moving forward in a speedy and expeditious manner. So again, we're in a very great place. Everything that's been happening is a fantastic, huge step forward. And this is just a really monumental day for the Police Accountability Board. And it's just honestly a moment of celebration. This is a real step forward for this community, making sure that our policing system is transparent. Chair Wilson, I don't know if you or anyone else on the board wants to add to that.
I don't really necessarily have anything to add. I think that was very nicely done. Good summary. If anybody else has anything, though.
And if anyone wants to ask any questions about, about this MOU or about our new lawyers, anything at all, we're happy to field those questions now.
Take care. Have a good night.
Connor, do you anticipate any further changes in the present draft of the MOU?
Yes. Our lawyers who I think Rabbi Settle and I were in the meeting with our lawyers. They've already done a few reviews of that MOU and come up with some places where there need to be some changes to make sure that we don't have any confusion or problems in the future. And so hopefully the next steps are going to be our lawyers, speaking with Linda Kingsley, reaching out to her, making that meeting happen so that we can get a document that works for everybody. So yes, there were some tweaks that need to be made. Danielle?
When would those suggested changes be presented to Linda Kingsley?
We're probably going to get a document from our lawyers sometime today or tomorrow. I'm going to take a look at it. We'll send it back to them. Hopefully they can get that meeting scheduled, in the coming days,
Okay.
so we can get this all finalized. And obviously, if folks didn't know, as of today, the Mayor Warren has suspended one of the attorneys who was involved in the negotiation of that agreement, Tim Curtin, Corporation Counsel. He was suspended today for misconduct relating to the suppression of information regarding Daniel Prude. So, obviously, again, when one of the parties to this negotiation is someone who literally just got suspended for this, all the more reason for the PAB to have its own lawyer to make sure that whatever processes we're agreeing to, they're the ones that are about transparency as opposed to anything else.
Yes, and community driven.
Yep. Board Member Brown?
Yes, you'll be sending us out a copy of that at the same time that everybody else gets it, so we can
Absolutely.
read. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions on this MOU? And just, one thing to make clear for folks, a really important part of whatever agreement we have is not only to establish all the processes moving forward, but essentially to say all the things that we requested over the last 2 months need to be made available now. And just so folks are clear, I know there's a couple points of confusion out in the community. The first thing is these lawyers are pro bono. They are working for free. This is not costing the city an additional penny. I know that the city's retained a lot of lawyers over the last year when it comes to police misconduct. The PAB is not paying for any new lawyers. The second thing that folks just need to be made clear about is that, yes, there are many specific documents that are still outstanding. We have described in great detail those documents to the city. And so there's no question that there's a lot of information that's still yet to come. And we are very much looking forward to reviewing that information so we can make the proposals for change that this community really wants us to make. Anything else?
One other thing, Connor, it all relates. When does this stop being a one-man band?
Great question. We actually have final interviews. We have some very fantastic finalist candidates for both of our open positions who I am interviewing in blocks early next week. And so my hope is that by perhaps either the end of next week or at latest the earliest of the following week, we will have some offers out to people.
Are these either of these people going to be expected to deal with the documents and information related to the different incidents like Harris Street?
One position is the chief of administration position. Will be helping out getting a lot of these documents in place. But the chief of community and education and engagement, that's going to be doing a lot of our public facing work that we have to do to engage the community, have those hearings where people are being involved in our work, being listened to, that kind of thing. Chief of administration is going to be helping build these processes, and in doing so is probably going to do a little bit of that work. But it's a great question because it brings us to the second part of today's meeting, which is budget. Because in reality, the most intensive part of our work is reviewing cases of misconduct. And you have to have staff to do it. Right now, the PAB has one person to do all of this policy and procedure thinking, all of the reviewing of the documents, all of the collecting of the documents, all the analysis, right? We need people to do that work. And so the budget is a great way to think about what we need to do our jobs right.
Does anybody have any other questions about the MOU? Okay. All right, so let's move on to the budget.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So the budget is the secret to our success. You know, we now, especially with lawyers in our corner, we have a lot of the resources we need to succeed. We've got a diverse, talented, dedicated board to doing our work. We have the legal authority to get the job done, but we need the actual human resources, the people, to make sure that our work can happen. Oh, let me just admit the rabbi. So here's the important thing. You know, we can get caught up in the details of the budget process, but in the meetings over the last couple of weeks, what's very clear is that city council and the city want detailed information from us about what we need to do our jobs. You know, we haven't seen the final version of that reform plan from the city. You know, they had to delay it a little bit. They won't be voting or releasing the plan to the public, I think, maybe till early next week. So it's hard to know exactly what's in that reform plan, but it is clear that part of that plan is probably going to call for the PAB to be funded at whatever levels it needs to do its work on a kind of piece by piece basis, right? So if we don't have disciplinary powers, we might not get as much money as if we did have disciplinary powers to do all of our work. But we certainly, you know, council is saying, we want to see the specific figures that you need to do your jobs. And so council wants a budget that breaks down task by task what it costs to do our work. Right? We don't want some just big figure out of nowhere. They want clear links between what we have to do and the money it takes to get that done. They also want a budget backed up by best practices, research, and data. These can't just be, you know, things coming out of nowhere. We have to link this to reality in one way or another. You know, I think there's some skepticism about, you know, this is a new thing that we're doing. We need to really prove ourselves. And the thing that we really want to avoid is a situation where people say, you know, go out and do it. And if you fail, then we'll give you money. We want to prove to people up front that we know what we're doing. And so that we don't have to get in a situation where we're failing the community, but instead we can start off on the right foot with the resources that we actually need. And finally, we need a budget proposal as soon as possible. Now, here's the thing about that. The budget isn't proposed by the city until sometime in, you know, May or June. And the city council will vote on it sometime around then, right? But the earlier we can get things in and out to the community, the more time folks will have to ask questions, to talk, to develop things. And so we discussed this last time. We'd really like to get a concrete budget proposal out sometime in the next week. So the purpose of today is to kind of give an overview of what that budget proposal might look like. I just want to emphasize why the budget is so important. Most of our peers, most of the other civilian review boards in the country fail for a lack of funding. This is not some anecdote. This is raw, hard facts. If you look at the history of civilian review boards, the people tasked with keeping the police accountable, they don't fail because the leadership isn't good. Even the people with the best intentions, the boards with the best intentions, will fail if they don't have the resources to do their jobs. It is one of the clearest facts in civilian review board history. So our success depends on us getting the money we need to do our jobs. So when we think about what we need to be as an organization, we can choose two of the following three. We can be swift, maybe do our work quickly. We can be fair in our work. We can be thorough. We can do all our work based on data, best practices, do it in a way so that no matter who looks at our investigations, whatever, whether a police officer or a member of the community, they can say, they did all the work here, and I trust what they do. And then there's a third option. We can be cheap. We can do it on the cheap, right? We can do things on a shoestring. But we only pick two here, right? We can be cheap and fair, but if we are, we're going to be slow as molasses. We can be cheap and swift, but we're going to do things without any kind of serious rigor, and no one should trust our work. So what if we choose to be swift and fair? And here's just something, you know, because again, if we choose to try and do it cheap and something else, here's what happens. Let's go to Oakland. In Oakland, they take to investigate the average serious case up to a year. Up to a year. And they are one of the fastest ones out there. New York City, it takes 174 days to look at the average accepted complaint, but 2 years or more for serious cases. What about Chicago? The average is around, and it's a little, I want to say these are rough numbers, very rough numbers, but it's about 270 days. Right? That's almost a year for the average complaint that they accept. 2 years or more. They have some cases in Chicago that have been going on for 4 years. So it's very clear what happens if you don't get the resources you do. Justice delayed is justice denied, and without resources, we will delay justice, period. It's unavoidable. So let's choose to see what the budget would look like if we could be swift and fair rather than cheap. Let's see where we could go. And part of the reason we can feel justified in kind of building a budget based on being quick and being fair is as part of what the city charter requires us to do, right? The charter lays out a very extensive process through which we have to investigate complaints. We have to do it with a lot of due process concerns, digging up all the evidence, going through lots of different processes, procedures, steps to make sure that we treat officers fairly, right? So the charter says we have to be fair. We don't have any choice about it. We can't not be fair. It would be illegal for us not to be fair. Okay, so we have to be that. So do we also have to be swift? Well, the city charter doesn't say we have to be swift, but boy, does it say we really should. And the charter says that the annual budget that we get, the proposed budget, not the one that city council has to adopt, but the one that is proposed to council, must provide funding for all the staff and expenses we need for the purposes of resolving all complaints in 90 days. Not just the average complaint, but all complaints. Now think about that, 90 days. Let's go back to these people. 90 days is significantly faster than any of these other places, right? So we have to be better resourced than they are. Now it's a low bar in most of these cases, but we do have to be better resourced than they are to do this. Now, there's no rule that says that city charter has to adopt this proposed budget. But what we have to do is communicate what the budget would need to look like to do 90 days. It's up to city council. If they don't want us to process cases in 90 days, they don't have to. They can choose PAB, you can take a year. You can take 2 years. We would just have to deal with that. But we have to communicate to the city council and the public what it actually takes to do 90 days. So the question is for us, because we can talk about expenses, but in reality, we all know staffing is the most expensive part of doing any work. So the question is, how many staff do we need to resolve any case in 90 days, right? And this is just talking about investigations into, police misconduct. So thankfully, there's some data here. It's not the most comprehensive data. There's a little bit of conflicts in it, but there's some good data sources. There's data sources on case processing statistics from major civilian review boards. Places like New York City and Chicago provide really great case processing data. There's other places like Denver, Colorado, that have some case processing data, but they're a little bit different from Chicago and New York City. Chicago and New York agencies are kind of the gold standard for long-lasting, durable investigation processes. So it's really great that we have the data from them. That's probably the best source we can go to. We also need staffing and budget figures from these other review boards, right? And then you'd also want to have interviews with the investigators and leadership and other civilian review boards to kind of understand where they're coming from. Well, I've gathered all this data. Now, of course, you could gather much more data than I already have, right? But talking to the investigators, talking to the analysts, talking to the top level staff, looking at all this case processing data, I've done it. And you do it, and you'll come up with some, and again, the data is not 100,000% on this stuff, but it really strongly suggests the following. You need one full-time staff for every 4 complaints that you accept each year. I just want to walk through this. There's a difference between someone filing a complaint and you accepting a complaint, right? So if someone files a complaint and they file a complaint against an officer who's not in RPD, we can't take that, right? So that's not a complaint you accept, that's a complaint you reject, right? So the difference between complaints filed and complaints accepted. But essentially for every complaint you say, okay, we're going to look into this. you need 1 full-time staffer for every 4 complaints you look at. Now that might seem pretty significant. You might think, wow, that's a pretty rigorous, that's a lot of people to have. But here's why this isn't out of mind figure. Okay, and remember, it's every annual complaints, right? So if you accept 40 complaints in a year, right? 10 full-time staff. So here's why this kind of work can be so labor intensive. For every case, you may have to do all the following. You have to field the complaint. When someone files a complaint, you have to be able to properly deal with them, contact them in whatever language they're coming at you in. You have to have the complaints in the right language. You have to be able to follow up with them to make sure the complaint gets filled out completely. And that's like an interview process, right? You have to request and review extensive evidence, every inch of body-worn camera footage, every report, witness statements for any complaint, for any case. You could be doing this. Depositions, interviews with officers. Those are really resource and time-intensive things to do. You can write multiple case reports to your supervisors and then a case report to the board. You have to present the case to the entire PAB. That's part of our rules. Before we actually hold a disciplinary hearing, we'd have to present the case to all 9 of you. We'd have to hold a trial-like hearing in front of a panel of 3 people. We'd have to select who those 3 people are, schedule a time for them, educate them on what the case that they're going to be hearing is. You'd have to have a stenographer, a prosecuting lawyer, and there's a defense lawyer in the room. And then you'd have to have staff assist the panel of PAB in writing an actual opinion that would hold up in court, right? You'd have to prosecute an appeal. And then, and likely in a lot of these cases, officers might go to a court to challenge what the PAB does. No police union is just going to let a civilian review board fire an officer without going to a court case, right? So in any complaint you receive, you may have to do all of these things. And so that's why when you talk to investigators or prosecutors and other boards, and you ask them, how many complaints do you get through in the average month? They might say 3 or 4. That's how resource intensive this work is. Think of this whole kind of work as just a district attorney's office, right? That's the kind of work that you have to do when you are investigating these kind of complaints. So, you figure, you do the math, right? You do the math, and if you accept about 220 complaints a year, which is, that figure doesn't come out of nowhere. City council itself accepts us to take in about 200 complaints in a year. I don't know where they got that figure, but that's where they're coming from. And you can kind of do some math on how many officers you have in a place and how many complaints you can expect based on your population or population of officers. I've done the math in terms of places like Chicago, Oakland, other cities. And if we're anything like the city of Chicago, for example, which shares a lot of things in Rochester in common, we can probably expect to take in 220 complaints a year if we're extremely conservative about the assumptions that we're making. Yes, Bob.
Connor, there is a review board operating right now. How many cases do they see per year?
A tiny handful. A tiny handful.
So what's your justification for us seeing more?
Perhaps the most important factor in a place taking complaints is whether or not the community knows about the process and has trust in the process. It is, and I want to just first say that people currently running the Civilian Review Board, the people at the Center for Dispute Resolution, do great work. And they are, I think, in a lot of places unfairly maligned for some of the work that they've done. They do great work. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the community does not know about this process and does not trust that process. And so they used to get more complaints than they do now. But I think part of the problem is that when the process that's been offered to the community is just something like, we'll review what the police do, it's not surprising that people don't file complaints, right? So current case processing statistics from the Center for Dispute Settlement are not really in any way useful for us. A better analogy is the kind of boards that are out there that are trusted, right? or are seen as having discipline. So maybe the best board to look at is Oakland. Oakland is kind of the board that's almost closest to us across the country. They can actually discipline and fire officers. You know how many complaints they get per year? And they've only been around for a few years in their current form. 500. 500. And so again, I think 220 is deeply conservative in many ways. Deeply conservative.
I have a question real quick. So these 220 complaints a year, that's not putting them into categories, serious versus not serious. They are just 220 complaints, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And also, this is assuming that these are just the ones we accept, right? There could be more that are being filed here, right? That we are rejecting. Part of the thing about us, and this is kind of a sidetrack, but we are going to accept a much higher rate number of our complaints than any other civilian review board. Why? Because our jurisdiction is much broader. Most other civilian review boards can only prosecute officers for a small subset of things. In Chicago, it's like a list that big, right? Our jurisdiction, you break any law, if you break any rule, and anything that's considered inappropriate, even if it's not breaking a rule or a law. So, our potential to accept complaints is way bigger than other places. So again, and part of this too is, advertising. The community has to know about our work, which is part of the reason why we need to actually do a lot of community engagement, because a big way that organizations like ours fail is if no one knows about us. We know so many people don't know about the PAB right now. And so it's true, we might not get many complaints, but my guess is that we won't get complaints if we're failing, right? That's my guess at this point. So this 220 complaint figure, and again, I just want to say this is a super top level summary. We've got reams of data on this that we're going to be able to put in any kind of budget proposal. But if we accept 220 complaints a year, we need about 40 to 50 full-time staffers. Now, here's the thing to remember. This is all premised on that 90-day window. If you say, I'm going to forget the 90-day thing, let's go with 180 days, half a year, then you can cut this in about half, right? Which is a big difference, 20 to 25 people versus 40 to 50. But of course, it's also a much bigger difference going to say to someone, yeah, we'll probably resolve your case in 90 days versus half a year, right? So again, if the board wants to propose a budget that is not 90 days, you can, but we just have to be very upfront with what that would cost. Yes, Chair Wilson.
So I guess my question is about the full-time staffers. Is that investigators or is that administrative staff? Is that social workers? What does that look like? Because
I'm going to answer that.
Okay.
I'm going to answer that in just a second because it's a very important question. So here's what that 40 to 50 full-time staffers mean. If you're doing the data, if you're looking at the other agencies, it's all the staff in the agency. So this isn't 40 to 50 full-time investigators. It's complaint intake, it's administration, it's prosecution. So it's not 40 to 50 full-time investigators. It's the support staff and all that. But there's a very important qualification to that I'll get into in just a minute. But let's say that we say, okay, to do this investigatory work, we need 40 to 50 full-time staff. The organization structure would look something like you'd have complaint management just to do complaint intake, 5 to 7 people. Now that sounds like a lot of people, but if you are doing a process, if you are following the rules in the city charter, which are this, we have to have complaint forms available in every government building across the city. They have to be available on every police officer in the city. They have to be available in community centers across the city. So we have to have staff not only to just take in complaints, but distribute and disseminate complaints across the city, train organizations into how to use these complaints, right? We also have to be able to take in complaints in any language, right? We need to make sure that our complaint staff is Spanish speaking, right? We have to make sure that the complaint staff are there so that when someone calls on the hotline, we don't have to connect to somewhere else. We need dedicated staff for this purpose, right? So there's a lot, and you also need IT staff when it comes to complaint management, right? You need to have someone running the internal databases and updating the website and all this. Case prosecution, 24 to 30 staff, depending on how you look at it, 24, you need 24 so investigators, and that includes managers, it includes, procedural people, it's the whole kit and caboodle. And then administration and staff support, this includes, secretarial people and stenographers, which are, you actually need full-time stenographers for this kind of stuff, right? So, and then you need legal and leadership, which would include my position. And then you would need full-time lawyers. There's no question you would. Why? Because every case that you're filing, there's almost certain, whether if there's going to be any kind of discipline, there's going to be an appeal, right? You cannot do this work without full-time lawyers. That is something that I've heard across the board. If you do not have lawyers involved in this, your decisions are going to get reversed, and it can't work. You need full-time lawyers for this. Doesn't have to be a huge staff, but you need your own lawyers. So here's the problem with everything I just told you. The data that I'm talking about, it only justifies staff for complaint-related work. Why? Because most of the other civilian review boards we're talking about, they do one thing: discipline. That's all they do, is investigate individual instances of misconduct and do discipline. That's it. That's it. What's the problem? We have a lot more to do. We got a lot more to do. I'm going to walk through everything else that we have to do. We have to investigate RPD patterns, practices, and policies and procedures. We have to develop new practices and policies, right? We have to educate and engage Rochesterians in lots of fundamental ways. We have to administer all of that work, run meetings, events, office space, everything. And we have to ensure that all of our work is legally sound. These aren't options. These are duties, right? So it's not like we can just say, this is it. Unless we want to abandon our legal duties, we have to do these things too. So let's just go through some of these specific categories, because in the abstract, it can seem like these things get done by a few staffers, right? But here's really what it means to investigate the RPD's work from a structural level. You have to review everything done by an organization with 900 plus people in it. Everything. Policies, procedures, practices for all the things they do. You have to do, investigate things like crisis response, officer training, white supremacy, the Puerto Rican festival, the police that are at Wegmans, the scuba squad. Why are police on horses? What can we do about pepper balls? How does the pepper spraying manual has to do? Why are police officers in cars all the time? The million different questions that people have about policing generally would have to be answered by these people, not the people who are investigating cases of misconduct. Because remember, all those staff, the only thing they have time to do is look at individual complaints. That's all they have time to do. So the process of doing this is also resource intensive, as I think we've all come to learn. You have to make information requests, you have to look at documents, you have to hold oversight hearings, gather testimony, and write reports. And to do all this, you have to have some level of expertise, right? And so to do this kind of work, you need an oversight bureau. You have someone a chief of oversight to run it. You have to have data analysts to sift through all of the data that you're going to get in from the RPD about their enforcement patterns. And you'd have to have investigators. Now, you wouldn't need more than a handful of people necessarily to do this, but you can't just have one or two people. It's just not possible. Not possible. And really, the more people you add to this, the better. It's not like there's some cap on this, right? But there is certainly a floor at which you cannot do this work without the staff. This is actually separate from the work of developing new policies and procedures, which is something we're all really, the big question. What is the actual policy and procedure framework for mental health response? That is separate from the work of investigating what RPD actually does. Because for this, you have to look outside the RPD. You have to conduct extensive research into best practices and cutting edge programs. You have to evaluate what Rochesterians want too. You have to be talking and engaging with them instead of just coming up with ideas out of the ether, out of academia. And then you have to craft plans and proposals that are legally sound and actually will do the job. And then also we have a whole nother set of work, which is we have to create rules all the time, whether it's coming to discipline, procedural rules, whatever. And doing that right takes time and effort too. So you need a bureau for policy and regulation. And again, Handful of staff here. Some people to make rules, to analyze policy, craft this stuff. Not a ton of people, but not just one or two either. So educating and engaging Rochesterians, one of the most important things we can do. You have to educate the public on the RPD, about individual incidents, misconduct. You have to be talking to the press about this. Almost every day we see incidents of potential misconduct in this community. We have to be talking about that and educating, folks about the PAB's work. This work of educating and engaging Rochesterians, if we don't do this, it doesn't matter how many investigators we have. If Rochesterians don't know about the complaint process, if they don't know how to file a complaint, if they don't know where to go, if they don't know all the ways they can, we can help them, we won't help them. So this public engagement stuff, which I know, there's a lot of people in the community, or at least, in City Hall, who are very skeptical of any justification for why we should be doing this work. If you go to other civilian review boards, they will tell you if you are not advertising your work to the community, you'll fail. So this isn't optional, it's essential. And also, we have a duty to make sure that Rochesterians from all backgrounds, doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter what, any disability you may have, you have to be able to engage in our work. And that doesn't come cheap. We have, that means having interpreters. That means having, accessible meeting spaces and office space. It's all in there, right? You have to have forums and events where Rochesterians can be heard on public safety. And this isn't necessarily a necessary legal duty of ours, but here's something really exciting that we actually can do. We can lead a people's budgeting process, right? We can do that. We can, right? So, to do this, again, you need an education and engagement bureau. Again, just a handful of staff. And, I'm a broken record here about, you can't just have one or two. And then here's the big one, because now with all these different features, this is a real agency, right? You're actually doing a lot of stuff. And you need to actually start administering the agency as if it's an organization that needs, full-time support. You have to have people ensuring accessibility in all our work, right? Again, with an agency of dozens of people, you can't ignore these really important legal obligations. And you can't rely on the city to ensure that you follow those obligations, right? Because the city is taxed enough dealing with its current departments, right? So you need to ensure that you do this independently. You have to have your own web presence, internal IT infrastructure. And this isn't just a matter of having a computer and a web server. You have to be extremely secure in all of your data and information technology needs, right? Because you're dealing with some of the most sensitive information out there with regards to policing, misconduct, and injury, right? So you can't just say, oh, we'll offload IT onto the city's existing system. Particularly if you have dozens of people doing this work. You have to have your own people. These people have to schedule, run, plan all meetings and events. Right now, the executive director is doing all that. And that's, half my job right now. Imagine doing that for an agency of, dozens of people. You need administrative staff. Here's a huge one. The board and staff, you have to be educated and trained. All those training programs, educational sessions, someone's got to do that regularly. Because remember, I received, outside of the basic benefits onboarding, I didn't receive any training. And so if we're going to be trained in our work, we have to do it on our own. The city won't provide it. We have to do it. And then, to hire and recruit. If you're an actual organization of this size, you have to be a hire and recruit on your own. And I'm sorry, this is a wrong title, but to do this, you'd have to have an administrative bureau that would have these kind of positions. And if you're getting up into the dozens of people, you need office space bigger than the place we have now. We can fit maybe 8, 9 people in our current space if you squeeze tight. But, if you're talking dozens of people, you need your own office space. Okay, so, sorry. So that's kind of an overview of all the things. Now, I know it's a little overwhelming. Right? If you think about it and step back and think about where we are right now with one staff member, we're going to hire 2 more, and we maxed out our budget. And thinking about where we're going in terms of this stuff, it can seem overwhelming, like too far a step. But what it is it's the reality about what we need to do all our work. Now, it is the board's choice whether or not you want to present a budget that does less than those things or does them in a cheaper or less thorough way. But I think there's a clear baseline for this work that you need to kind of get the work done. So, I can talk about the details on any of this. You can kind of start thinking about budget figures. My thought is to kind of present council with a few figures, kind of, a green zone of, really fantastic. We can make sure we do a lot of work and all our work in this green zone of money. We could do in a yellow zone where we think we could do the work, and then a red zone where if you gave us this much money, we just would have to cut core services and not be able to do our work. So maybe that might be a useful way to allow city council to think about things, because another thing that I've heard in talking to other agencies is if you propose a number, expect that to be negotiated down. And so if the number that we come up with is like the base minimal number for us to do our work, we should probably expect, we wouldn't be surprised if city council gave us less than that. So we have to be very, thinking strategically about this. And I know it's interesting talking about strategy in a public meeting, but it's important that the community understand what is going to have to go into this budget process and to be frank and open about it from day one. And so I really think the best thing we can do is provide all of the data, statistics, and research alongside clear, simple facts and figures. Figures like this one. If you spent, for every $20 that we spend on policing in Rochester, if you spend about $1 on police accountability, it would make us the most best funded police accountability board in the country. And it would give us a good shot at doing all our work. So that's 20 to 1, that ratio, right? Right now, the ratio is 300 to 1. For every $300 we spend on policing, we spend $1 on the PAB. So, and again, that kind of getting into the general world of where a number would be for us, about what the city spends on parking. The parking bureau gets about, $5-6 million a year to ticket people and, run the parking garages, and right now, if we get somewhere in there, we're probably in a decent place. When you're talking about dozens of staff, that's not tens of millions of dollars. That's somewhere in like the $5 to $7 million budget range. So I think I've talked long enough. I'm happy to open it up for discussion about next steps, questions about the data, where we need to go, anything like that.
Connor, I'm just looking at the draft that you put out, and when I had a real job, I used to do a lot of grants, and I always tried to imagine that whatever I did was being read by the reviewer while they were using the bathroom. Because if you can't get your point across in that period of time, chances are that you will have lost. And so I like the way you presented the rationale for the different spaces. I don't see that in the paper that you gave us.
Yeah, no, that I just want to clarify that overview. I think it was a request for numbers. That overview is not anything close to a budget proposal that I would actually, release publicly.
Well, I think you should take the presentation that you just made and put the numbers to it.
Happy to do it.
So I think the thing that stands out to me the most is just, we think about what this agency is going to look like. It's, I was actually happy to see kind of the breakdown of departments, because I think when we're the board and we do all this, board work, we have to think about what this actual agency looks like department to department, even down to the human resources department, right? If you want to talk about just even that space. So that's just, there's so much that we have to, this agency has a lot to do, and that just really kind of hit me a little bit. They hit me hard tonight. So that's my first thought.
You're muted, Reverend Harvey. I don't know if you're speaking.
May not be speaking to us.
Rip, you're. Board Member Press.
So Connor, I remember your very first press conference when we hired you, and when you were speaking, you kept saying, "We're going to hire dozens and dozens and dozens of people." And at that time, I really didn't understand why you were saying that, but now I do. Do you remember that? You can say, "We're going to hire dozens and dozens of people."
Oh, I do.
So that came to mind. I like the fact that you picked swift and fair, because obviously there's a saying in Spanish, "Lo barato sale caro," which means the cheap eventually cost you more. And so, if we don't have a good process, then we're going to continue to find ourselves, in the situations that we are today, dealing with, with police brutality or the situations that we've seen in the past year and a half. So it's important to have all of those processes in place. I guess my question is, where do we expect, or are we giving any suggestion as to where this money is going to come from? Because I think that's still needs to be answered. And do we have some solid suggestions for that?
So the first thing I'll say is that, this $1 million from the state, that's, it's in the proposed budget. We don't know if it'll get into the final budget. That $1 million, we could do a lot of concrete things with. My suggestion, I have some thoughts about what we could do with it, but every dollar we get, we can do something with, right? And so the point of saying that is that the money can come from anywhere. But whenever you get money from the state, or if you get money from the federal government, they usually want you to say, use this money for a year, use it for a program. So sustained funding, unless we get an exception from some, nonprofit, institutional, philanthropy or whatever, it's probably going to have to come from city council. Now every $1 million grant or whatever it is we get this year, that makes it easier, I think, for city council to kind of step up on some things. But long-term funding, it has to come locally. Otherwise, we could never know if the next year that money will go away.
So I know that people are often against, tax raises, raising taxes. But if there was a way, and I know they've done this in other big cities for other things, not particularly for PAB, but for other programs, that they've seen a need for, where they were able to raise taxes, but that tax raise was specifically for that program. I know that, 70-something% of the citizens wanted to see this program. Are those people also willing to have a tax increase that can go specifically for PAB? And I don't know what that entails, and I don't know what it would take, but I think it's an idea that we should consider. Because as a citizen, right, that pays taxes, I'd rather pay taxes for this than some of the other stuff that I'm paying taxes for. That I don't see any benefit or, any way of helping my community. So
I agree with that. And I really like the fact that when we're thinking about this whole process, we're building it with an inclusive lens, because oftentimes the accommodations come after the fact. So I think that part is definitely good. And like I said, when you think about that piece of it, of course, the price is going to go up, because oftentimes people don't build it that way. And I'd rather see it built right, and have the adequate staff to do, and adequate people to do the work. That way, if we're doing it without the adequate resources, then that also creates more issues and loopholes with policies. And then that would also, for the individuals that are saying that, this policy, a certain policy wasn't made right, that would just, I guess, validate that thought. There's people in the community that are saying that. So if it's set up that way, then we're destined to fail in a sense. So I like the fact that you showed us, what's all included and have that inclusive lens. And like I said, I would also always err on the side of doing what's right. So
I'm just going to quickly respond to the vice chair's points on two levels. First, part of the budget proposals that I'm kind of coming up with are they adopt a principle of about equal or equitable pay. We don't have anyone in the agency making six figures. On the other hand, we don't have anyone making $40,000. Oftentimes, other civilian review boards pay their investigators between $30,000 and $40,000. And the work that you ask investigators to do is to review the footage that you've all been reviewing on a daily basis. It is hard work. And disproportionately, the people who work for civilian review boards are Black and brown people and Black and brown women. And so if you choose to pay those people $30,000, $40,000, when the average police officer salary in Rochester is $100,000, you can expect high turnover and not great work. You pay for the work you get for. So I would be, again, the budget proposal that we put forth, I hope is one where most people in the agency get somewhere around what I get paid. So even if you're an administrator and you're just seen as, executive assistant, you still get paid a good wage, right? But expect pushback. Expect people to say, we shouldn't pay that person. They should only get paid $40,000. So an important part of kind of what we do is kind of pay equity. I just want to put that out there too. Yeah, so that's and we can. I had another point, but I forget it. We can move on to the rabbi.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
In regard to funding, speaking as a citizen of Rochester, if our city can find the money to pay Wilmer Hale, and if our city can find the money to pay police officers $100,000 with twice as many police officers here as comparable cities, I think there are other places to find the money for the PAB.
And also
without raising taxes.
We spent over $2.5 million on police overtime in the last year just for responding to policing related protests. $2.5 million, over $2.5 million, which is over 5 times our current budget.
Any other thoughts?
I had one thing that's a very important thing for the board to decide. As part of the budget process, I've done a lot of research on a question that's come up a few times. Do other boards pay their board members? It's an interesting question for us because it's absolutely something that can be part of the budget request. It's funny. Many boards do not pay their board members. Some, however, provide stipends, often for things for like the time that you're spending doing your work. Some provide stipends for childcare. Some provide transportation stipends, many other things. There's a lot of different models. A very interesting one is from New York City. New York City Civilian Review Board, it has, I think, 12 to 15 people on it. They have an option. You can either choose to do your work pro bono as a volunteer, or you can choose to receive compensation linked to the amount of time you work. So it's interesting. Some board members in New York City, according to, at least to the public data I've seen, receive no money. Some receive a few $1,000s every year. And then some who work, take it almost like a part-time job, earn, up to $20,000, $30,000 a year. And so average in New York City, they spend, I'm trying to remember the figure, but it's somewhere around like $60,000 or $70,000 a year on board member compensation. But it does allow 1 or 2 board members who really want to be invested in the work to be able to take some time to really put into it. So that's one model that's out there. There's other models too, but I just wanted to say there's a lot of options on the table if that's something that folks want to look for. And all I'll say is the reason why I bring that up is because unlike many other boards, you have to do a ton of work. Many other boards just have to do, we review the occasional case. You folks have to do review of initial cases. Like, so before it goes to a disciplinary hearing, you all have to hear it. You have to hear cases in panels of 3. You have to hear appeals as a whole board. And then you also have to policy, procedure, training, all these other things too. So it's just something to think about, that when this agency gets to a certain size, your work may not shrink, it may dramatically increase.
Don't say that. No. So the one thing I say also, it seems to me that that's a huge inclusivity issue, because if we want people from the spectrum of the community, right, things like childcare, things like transportation, things like compensation for time are the only way they'll be able to join this board. And I think we have to really be aware of that.
I also had a question though, because I was told that if we were getting paid, that we would have to be elected to these positions instead of being elected by our different agencies that brought us here. So is it like, and I'm talking about a city election, like you run for the seat. Is that the case? Because I know that there's a lot of concern about that.
I'm not going to say, because I haven't looked into the question. What I will say is we don't have to decide this as part of the budget process either. We can save this for another time, but it is just something to start thinking about. Because, you know, of course, this is obviously, a lot of people have different thoughts about this. There will be controversy around any kind of payment to board members. So you can kind of separate it off from the budget. But also, if it's something that you do think should be in this budget proposal, I just wanted to put it on the table. And just also to note that you could do it in a way that wouldn't be, you know, exorbitant in terms of cost.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Nope, I'm done.
I guess my thought process on that, I'm just wondering what the results are from that committee, you know, in terms of their work. Are they yielding good results? Or, I mean, do we have any, I don't know, other information from that? Like, you know, turnaround time, things like that from their cases? Do we know?
I'm sorry, what committee?
So no, from New York City's board. I'm just wondering if that additional incentive is changing anything, if the processes are improved. Do you even have any information about that?
No, but I think it would be really great for me to bring some of those board members who are getting paid together and maybe hear from them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm committed to doing the work, period. And I do, like I said, for me, it's just a matter of the citizens of Rochester getting the justice that they need. So, you know, that's just my take on it. But it would be interesting to know if there's been some kind of change in the way they do their work, or, you know, if people, it would just be interesting to hear, you know, their side of it and how that influences things. But like I said, I'm committed to doing the work and just getting what we need to do our work as a whole for the organization.
Harrison, was that, I think you're up?
Who?
Yeah, you. Hi.
I would be in favor of just taking that off the table right away. Let's just not even consider that.
Okay. Is that
Simplify things.
I can afford to say that since I'm retired and
Board Member Perez?
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't necessarily, you know, an approval of us getting paid to do this work, but I think board member Droa made a good point of people that might want to participate, but, you know, would have issues with childcare, which is an issue all the way around, right? I know a lot about childcare and people not being able to do things because of childcare. So I think, you know, whether it's now or later when we talk about it, you know, we should consider those specific things, right? Maybe there's some specific things that we would consider, childcare being one of them. transportation, if they, some kind of stipend for gas, because for some folks, that could be an issue, and it's a cost for some people depending on, how much traveling they have to do. So things like that, I think, would be good to consider. I don't need any of those things, but I can see where some people who may want to participate and be part of this board, in the future, that those would be good things to engage those folks that normally wouldn't because of that.
Dr. Harvey?
Where am I off? I certainly don't advocate it for myself, but for many of you guys, you work from sun up to sundown. You guys I have 3 jobs. Honestly, I have 3 jobs, and I give it what I can. I have 3 full-time jobs.
Oh.
But many of you work from sun up to sundown. You put more hours, more labor in this board than many people put on jobs. I'm a school teacher. I teach 8th grade, and you give way more. I'm talking to you board members now. I won't call names, but you know who you are. You give way more to this board than I give to the school system and to my other jobs. I have a business. You give a lot. And while I would not advocate for me, but I would certainly advocate, you guys that's working like this. One, I don't see how you do it. And 2, I don't see how you do it. And it's not for nothing. You do get a reward in helping the community. There's a great reward. There's a labor of love that you're giving. But I would say you need pay. You need pay. And if there is some funds available for you, I would hold my hand up and say, give Shawnee, and I'm not gonna call another name, but you guys work hard. You guys work hard. And I salute you for the hard work that you do. I'm on airplanes reading text messages. I'm on airplanes going through emails and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, how y'all do it? So I'm really saying kudos to you for the great job that you do. Connor, you are amazing. And I think you're very fortunate, Connor, to have the team of committed people that you got who also have the time to invest in the work that this board is called to do. And so if I've never said it, I salute all of you for the work that you do. And I'm really glad to be a part of you. I'm sorry that I can't give what you give, but I salute you for what you do. And if there's a pay, give it to y'all.
You can actually cut us a check right now.
Well,
All them 3 jobs you work in for real.
3 jobs.
Yeah. 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Board Member Brown.
Dr. Harvey, thank you so much. Connor gets paid, but he'll eat cookies, cakes, and anything else. And Shawnee, Candy, she's also a cookie monster. Just because they're not getting financial compensation doesn't mean that we can't say thank you.
Yes.
In some tangible way. The other thing, now, yes, we work hard. We came on this board as volunteers. We're going to have a most difficult time as it is just to get the things we need in order to get the job done. Yes, down the road, there will be people coming on the board that will need additional assistance. Budgets will be done every however many years. When it comes to that, that can be included. Whatever we write up with our lawyers, we want to make sure that we don't close the door that says that this board will always be volunteers. But for what we're doing right now, I don't see us adding compensation to this particular thing for now. Let's get us a budget for the work that we have to do for now, and then move on, because we cannot stay stuck with there's a lot of work to be done and we ought to be compensated. We came on here, we knew that we joined because of the love of the work and the fact that we're making a difference in this city. And we're going to be able to see the fruit of our labor. And it's not going to be that long. But we also want to keep in mind that people will be compensated. But for the next year, 2 years, come on, let's just get our stuff done so we can put a budget out there that is negotiable with the city, get the things that we need to do the work, and not continue to spin our wheels complaining that they're not getting this, they're not giving us the stuff we need. We've got the lawyers. That's a big step forward. Let's move forward with that and get the work done.
I'm just going to interject one thing. You know, we often talk about the PAB having one staff. That's not true. Between all of the time that board members put in, we've got a team of full-time people, equivalent 4 or 5 folks. I'm serious. So the thing is if you want to, the first way, if folks want to thank Chair Wilson, Vice Chair McIntosh, Board Member Perez, Nikoloff, Harrison, Rabbi Settle, Danielle Tucker, Dr. Harvey, Arlene Brown, make their lives easier by having real staff to do the work. Because I promise you, if we have real staff, the burdens on the rest of the board to do the day-to-day operational stuff will deeply decrease. And they can do the work they need to do, setting the top level agenda, dreaming big and hearing cases. Because right now we're all together as a team doing the day-to-day stuff that staff should be doing.
So I just wanted to ask a question then, since we're talking about work and getting back to the budget, because I wanted to just ask about, what are the next steps, because it's 7:41, and what are the next steps in regards to getting this budget rolled out into City Council?
I'll say the next steps are as follows. I think we can get caught up on these hard deadlines, and there's a little bit of confusion about, back and forth on this stuff. The important thing is to get the information out as quickly as possible. On Monday, the Police Accountability Board Alliance has invited us to an event where, they're asking Shani and I and anyone else from the board that wants to show up to come to talk with the community about reimagining public safety and the PAB's role in achieving that now. Showing the community what investments in our work will do for Rochester. And we have to have some sense of what I think something close to this presentation will be pretty useful for folks there. But having that kind of in-depth, detailed document, I think I kind of defer to the board a little bit on this because we have a little bit of flex time, but certainly sometime in April, early April, we should have a full budget document ready to go. Something with spreadsheets and analysis, so you can have the whole thing plopped on the table. Because I just want to remind people, in the words of some elected officials, we can't know the money we need because we've never done this before. And so we need to prove to those elected officials, we've done the work, we know the research, we've got the data, and it's up to you to fund us at the appropriate level. So we have to make sure that our proposal's rigorous, that no one can say we didn't do our homework. And that's going to take a little bit of time. But we've got the foundation.
Did you have a question, Bob? Board member Bob?
I was going to say what I always say. Get focused on the budget. Forget about all the rest of the stuff. Get it done.
Well, honestly, thankfully that now we've got our lawyers, we can do that for a little bit. So I think that it sounds like my task is to devote full time to this budget stuff moving forward. Obviously, I'm going to be doing interviews a lot next week, but everything else I'm going to be calling the other staff, getting things on paper, gathering the data for this. And I would like to have some kind of full budget proposal to you folks, maybe, first full week of April to look at. Does that make some sense?
That'd be great.
Yeah, because I think we want to try to focus our energies into getting our rule-making tasks done and kind of tightening up whatever we can do with the budget, and then starting to do maybe an educational session for the board on the April 29th.
Yeah, and just adding, getting our processes down regarding working with the SUNY Buffalo on our disciplinary rules and getting that done as well, or at least starting that process.
Yeah. Go ahead. I know Board Member Brown has something to say.
Okay, I'm glad Dr. McIntosh mentioned the educational portion, and you're saying April 29th. Do you have any idea what you have in mind that would be presented at the very first one?
So the lay of the land in terms of the history of policing is the hope.
Okay.
That's the hope, and we don't have a confirmed speaker yet, so the date tentative.
That's tentative, okay. Because I think it's great for us to let the public know ahead of time that this is what we're thinking of. This is the direction we're going. Our first educational session will be this. We've got a topic. We know what we have. We can always find this. There's somebody out there that wants to get this information to the public and is be willing to step up and bring it to us. And they're going to let you know.
Right.
Early on.
So I think the why we haven't announced it yet was we also thought one of the pieces that's been missing that the public hasn't heard about is pretty much like voices from police officers or ex-police officers. So thinking that, someone with some lived experience that would be willing to come in and present would also be, of a good presenter. So we just hadn't, like I said, we decided on the date, but we just need to get a speaker. And as soon as we get that information, we'll get it out to the public.
After the initial history, hearing from current and former officers is awesome, because I've said from the day I got here, I don't know enough about their jobs. I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth as to how they think and why they do some of the things that they do. What's on paper is one thing, but just the fact that you're allowed to do it doesn't mean you should. They say lawful but awful. We want to get rid of some of that lawful but awful.
Thank you. And if anyone has any specific topics, I would say we can take that offline and just email me and we'll get it on the list.
The last thing I want to say, I just want to bring us back to the budget very quickly. There's been a big question about, and City Council is focused on incrementally funding the board based on what powers we have and procedures. It's true that we don't have disciplinary powers right now. I think we want to triple check with our lawyers to make sure that even without disciplinary powers, we could do investigations into individual cases of misconduct. If that was possible, let's just say that's the world where we can do everything but discipline the officers, the budget wouldn't be that different, because you still have to have a rigorous, fair, open process for investigating the complaints. Right? So the budget doesn't change a whole lot, maybe a little bit, but not a ton. That's very important for people to understand.
Connor, isn't that the point of Shelley's letter?
It is part of the point of Shelley's letter, but we want to make sure that our lawyers are on the same page about that. I don't think that the Shelley letter would be, I don't see any necessary problems with it, but because we've heard so many different things from so many different people over the last year about powers and procedures and all that, making sure that it's our lawyers who are giving us the go ahead and okay on this stuff, that's very important.
Reverend Nicola.
I hope that we will send a full budget at some point to city council and the city. And I hope that the city council and the city will not see it as an overly demanding thing, but as an opportunity to talk about values and priorities. I know that in nonprofit work and church work, right, budgets are philosophical documents, they're theological documents, or whatever tradition or whatever context you're in. They offer us a chance to say, here's why we're going to start with these kinds of things. Like, okay, we can't give you 10 mil, but we'll give you 2 mil because we think this is important now. And I think just opening up those kinds of conversations, which are not just about who said what or whose lawyer is calling whose lawyer, but what is the vision we have together as a city for the Police Accountability Board for the work we're doing, and then how are we going to take the next concrete steps towards it, is worth the price of admission alone in submitting a full budget and not doing it piecemeal. And I hope that rather than just a flat rejection or say people being outraged at the sticker that they see, the sticker price, it will lead to some substantive, concrete, and respectful conversations between everyone to say, what is our vision? What is our plan? And let's actually not just start something, but follow it through to its continuation, right? Let's not have this be like photonics where everyone's excited about it for 5 seconds and then who's talked about it for the last 5 years, right? This should be something that is exciting to people that we're all building together over time. But we only have that if we can talk about values and about goals and about what we're really hoping and dreaming for with this, and not just about cold hard figures. So yeah, to any, I hope that our colleagues on the city council, our colleagues in the city government will see this as that opportunity to continue some of the work that all these groups have been doing. What do we want to see from policing? How do we want to reimagine public safety? And what are the real costs to doing that well, to living out our values and not just talking about our values? So I am in full support of submitting something that at least will lead to conversation and lead to some different kinds of conversations than just who did what and who didn't do what.
Any other thoughts here? Okay, so it looks like we know our next steps. We're going to be working on education, and we're going to be working on, Connor's going to be working on the budget for the next, I would say, what is today, the 25th? So for the next couple weeks to get that rolled out to us by the first full week in April. Also, we're going to next meeting looking at the rules for us as a board, right, and getting those adopted. So we're going to send that out hopefully by the weekend if there's not anything else that needs to be done to it, but we have to take a look at that. Does anybody have anything else to say about the rules that we have? I know because it's been a while since we've looked at it, but the rules are pretty much all set, but I know that some other folks had questions.
I'll just interject to make it clear that our lawyers will be reviewing our rules as well.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, guys. So God,
The advantage of having lawyers.
Man, that's so nice.
It really is great.
Oh, that's so nice. All right, so that was all that I had for the next meeting, next couple meetings. So I know, well, let me just backtrack because I talked to Vice Chair about this today. We talked about the next couple of meetings being working on our rules and processes, and then the last week of the month tentatively being our education day. And so I hope that works out for everybody. But I think that's a pretty good schedule since we do have a lot of inward work to do and then processes to build. So, but I welcome additional thoughts, if any. Okay. All right. So if that's it, then I'm going to ask if there's nothing else anyone wants to talk about. I'm going to ask for a motion to end the meeting.
I'll make a motion that we end. Dr. Harvey seconded.
Okay. All in favor? Okay. Meeting's over. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everybody.